The sound of waves crashing against the shore should have been peaceful, but today it felt like thunder in my chest. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching my husband of 15 years raise a champagne glass to toast his engagement to another woman. The same beach where we had celebrated every wedding anniversary. The same beach where he had promised to love me forever. Blake looked happier than I had seen him in years. His arm wrapped around Nicole's tiny waist as she giggled and showed off her enormous diamond ring to the guests. A ring that cost more than most people's cars. A ring I never got because we were saving money when we got married. Ladies and gentlemen, Blake's voice carried across the beach. Thank you for joining Nicole and me on this special day. This beach holds so many memories for me, and now it's where I get to start my new life with the woman I truly love. The woman he truly loved. Not the woman who supported him through law school. Not the woman who gave up her teaching career to help him build his practice. Not the woman who nursed his father through cancer while Blake was too busy with work. The woman he truly loved was his 28-year-old secretary who had been working for him for 2 years. My best friend Simone touched my arm. Zara, you don't have to watch this. Let's go. But I stayed. I needed to see this. I needed to understand how a man could throw away 15 years of marriage like it meant nothing. How he could stand in the place where we had shared our most intimate moments and act like I never existed. Nicole spotted me in the crowd. Her smile got wider, more victorious. She whispered something to Blake and he turned to look at me. For just a moment, his face showed something that might have been shame. But then he straightened his shoulders and looked away. I remembered the day he asked for the divorce like it was yesterday, though it had been 4 months ago. I was in the kitchen making his favorite dinner when he walked in with that serious expression I had learned to fear. Zara, we need to talk. I had turned off the stove and followed him to the living room. My hands were shaking because I knew. Somehow I already knew. I want a divorce, he had said. No explanation. No apology. Just 5 words that ended 15 years of my life. Is there someone else? I had asked. He looked me straight in the eye and lied. No. I just don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. The cruelty of those words still cut deep. Not just that he didn't love me, but that he hadn't for a long time. How long had he been pretending? How long had I been living with a stranger who was counting down the days until he could leave me? I had signed the divorce papers without fighting. Blake seemed surprised by how easily I let go. His lawyer had prepared for a battle, but I just signed my name and walked away. I kept the house. It was mine before we married. He kept his law practice, his cars, and his father's inheritance that would come to him when the estate was settled. Or so he thought. Now I watched him kiss Nicole in front of 100 people, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not sadness. Not anger. Something colder. Something that made me reach into my purse and touch the envelope I had brought with me. Blake's father, Robert, had died 2 years ago. He left everything to Blake in his will. The family business, the real estate, the investments. Millions of dollars. Blake had been bragging about it, making plans. He had even bought Nicole's ring with money he borrowed against his inheritance. But Robert had been like a father to me. When my own parents died in a car accident during my 2nd year of marriage, Robert stepped in. He walked me down the aisle at my sister's wedding. He called me every Sunday to check on me. He told me I was the daughter he never had. Blake never knew about the conversations Robert and I had during his last months. The old man was sharp until the end. He saw things Blake thought he was hiding. He knew about the late nights, the business trips that didn't make sense, the way Blake talked to me when he thought no one was listening. If he ever hurts you, Zara, Robert had said to me one afternoon while Blake was at work, he'll regret it. At the time, I thought he was just being protective. I never imagined he meant it literally. The party was reaching its peak. Blake and Nicole were dancing now, lost in each other's arms. She was everything I wasn't, young, blonde, carefree. She had never worked 60 hours a week to put someone else through school. She had never held someone's hand while they grieved. She had never sacrificed her own dreams for someone else's success. But she was about to learn something about the man she was going to marry. Something that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. The lawyer would be here soon. I had asked him to wait until the party was in full swing before making his appearance. I wanted Blake to feel secure, happy, surrounded by people who would witness his humiliation. Simone leaned closer to me. You're scaring me with that look, Zara. What are you planning? I smiled for the first time in months. A real smile. Justice, Simone. I'm planning justice. The envelope in my purse contained photocopies of Robert's will. The real will. Not the version Blake's lawyer had shown him. The version that had one very important clause that Blake didn't know about. A clause that Robert had insisted on, despite his lawyer's advice. I watched Blake spin Nicole around, both of them laughing. They looked so perfect together, so happy. So confident that they had won. They had no idea their world was about to collapse. 15 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Blake Morrison was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. Smart, ambitious, charming. He was in his second year of law school when we met at a coffee shop near campus. I was 25, teaching third grade at an elementary school, and he was 27 with big dreams of starting his own practice. Our first date lasted 6 hours. We talked about everything: books, politics, our families, our dreams. He told me he wanted to be the kind of lawyer who helped people, not corporations. He said he wanted a wife who would be his partner in life, not just someone to cook and clean for him. I fell hard and fast. When Blake proposed after dating for 2 years, it was everything I had dreamed of. He took me to this very beach, got down on one knee as the sun set, and promised to love me forever. The ring was small, we were saving money for his last year of law school, but I didn't care. I was going to marry the man I loved. The wedding was perfect. Small but beautiful, with Robert walking me down the aisle because my parents had died the year before. Robert had tears in his eyes when he placed my hand in Blake's. "Take care of her, son," he had whispered. "She's special." Blake had squeezed my hand and promised he would. For the first few years he kept that promise. We were broke but happy. I worked long hours teaching while Blake studied and clerked at a small firm. We lived in my tiny house, the one my parents had left me, and dreamed about our future. Blake would graduate, pass the bar, and start his practice. I would keep teaching until we had kids, then maybe go back to school myself. We came to this beach every year on our anniversary. Blake would bring a bottle of cheap wine, and we would sit on the sand talking about our dreams. He always said this beach was special because it was where he realized he wanted to spend his life with me. Robert helped us through the tough times. When Blake graduated and struggled to find clients for his new practice, Robert lent us money to keep the office open. When I had a miscarriage in our third year of marriage, Robert was the one who held me while I cried because Blake was too uncomfortable with emotions to deal with my grief. "Give him time," Robert had said. "Some men don't know how to handle pain. But he loves you, Zara. I see it in his eyes when he looks at you." I believed Robert because I wanted to. Because I loved Blake so much that I made excuses for his emotional distance, his increasing focus on work, his gradual pulling away from me. Blake's law practice started to grow in our 5th year of marriage. He specialized in corporate law, despite his earlier dreams of helping people. "The money's better," he explained when I asked about the change. "We need to think about our future." I supported him. When he needed to work late, I brought him dinner at the office. When he had to travel for clients, I managed everything at home. When he said we should wait a few more years to have kids because he was too busy building his career, I agreed. I gave up pieces of myself gradually, so gradually that I didn't notice at first. I stopped painting, something I had loved since childhood, because Blake said the smell of paint bothered him. I stopped seeing some of my friends because he thought they were too dramatic or bad influences. I even stopped teaching after 8 years because Blake said it would look better if his wife didn't work, like he was successful enough to support both of us. Looking back now, I could see all the signs. The way he started criticizing everything, my cooking, my appearance, my opinions. The way he stopped touching me casually, stopped saying he loved me unless it was a routine goodnight. The way he made me feel like I was lucky he stayed with me instead of the other way around. Robert saw it too. During his last year, when he was sick with cancer, he spent a lot of time at our house. Blake was always too busy with work to visit his dying father, so I became Robert's caretaker. I drove him to doctor appointments, sat with him during chemotherapy, cooked his meals when he was too weak to care for himself. "You deserve better than this, sweetheart," Robert told me one afternoon after Blake had rushed out of the hospital room to take a work call. "A man should treasure his wife, not take her for granted." "He's just stressed about work," I had said automatically, "and worried about you." Robert gave me a look that said he wasn't fooled. Blake's always been selfish, even as a child. I hoped marriage would change him, hoped you would change him. But some people never learn to think about anyone but themselves. I defended Blake because that's what wives do. But Robert's words stayed with me. 2 years ago, when Robert died, I thought maybe Blake and I would grow closer through grief. Instead, Blake threw himself even more into work. He hired Nicole as his secretary a month after the funeral. She was fresh out of college, eager to please, and she thought Blake was the smartest man alive. At first, I was grateful for Nicole's help. Blake's practice was growing, and he needed someone organized to manage his schedule. Nicole was efficient, professional, and she always complimented me when she came to our house for work meetings. "You have such a beautiful home, Mrs. Morrison," she would say. And you're such an amazing cook. Blake is so lucky. I should have seen the warning signs. The way she stayed late at the office. The way Blake started mentioning her in conversations more often. The way he started comparing me to her in subtle ways. Nicole organized all my files perfectly, he would say after I had spent hours trying to help him with paperwork. She has such attention to detail. Or, Nicole thinks we should update the office website. She's really in tune with what clients want these days. The worst part was that I tried harder. I cooked better meals, kept the house cleaner, bought new clothes, tried to be more interesting when he talked about work. I turned myself inside out trying to be what he wanted instead of asking why what I was wasn't enough anymore. The last 2 years of our marriage were me chasing after a man who was already gone. Blake became a stranger who lived in my house, slept in my bed, and counted down the days until he could leave me for someone younger and more exciting. I should have seen the divorce coming. But when someone you love lies to your face every day, when they make you feel like you're crazy for noticing their distance, you start to doubt your own instincts. The night before he asked for the divorce, we came to this beach for our anniversary. 15 years. Blake seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. When I tried to talk about our memories here, he just nodded and made non-committal sounds. Are you happy, Blake? I had asked him as we sat watching the sunset. He had looked at me with something that might have been pity. Happiness is complicated, Zara. The next day he asked for the divorce. 5 words that ended 15 years of my life. Now I stood on the same beach, watching him celebrate his engagement to the woman he had chosen over me. But this time, I wasn't the broken woman who had signed divorce papers without a fight. This time I had Robert's real will in my purse. And I was about to show Blake what real justice looked like. Nicole Peterson was 26 when she walked into Blake's law office 2 years ago, fresh from her business degree and eager to start her career. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and the kind of perky personality that made everyone want to help her succeed. Including me. I remember the day Blake brought her home to meet me. It was a Friday evening, and he said he wanted to introduce me to his new secretary because she would be working closely with him on important cases. This is my wife, Zara, Blake had said, his hand on the small of Nicole's back in a way that should have warned me. And this is Nicole, my new assistant. Nicole had shaken my hand with enthusiasm. Mrs. Morrison. Blake talks about you all the time. He says you make the best lasagna in the world. I had smiled and invited her to stay for dinner. She was charming, funny, and she seemed genuinely interested in my life. She asked about my teaching background, complimented my house, and even offered to help with the dishes. You're so lucky to have such a beautiful home and a successful husband, she had said as we cleaned up in the kitchen. I hope I can find someone like Blake someday. At the time I thought she was sweet. Young and a little naive but hardworking and respectful. I even felt protective of her, like an older sister watching out for a younger one trying to make her way in the business world. Blake seemed energized by having Nicole around. He started staying at the office later, but he would come home talking about all the projects they were working on together. How smart she was, how quickly she learned, how much she was helping his practice grow. She reorganized the entire filing system in 1 week, he told me one evening. It would have taken me months to do that. That's wonderful, I had said, meaning it. It's nice that you have good help. Blake smiled in a way that made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't say why. Yes, she's very helpful. The changes started small. Blake began working weekends, something he had never done before. He said Nicole was helping him catch up on old cases and prepare for new ones. When I offered to bring lunch to the office on Saturdays, he always had a reason why I shouldn't. We're really focused today, Zara. I don't want any distractions. Nicole brought sandwiches for both of us already. We might be working late and I know you don't like to stay out past 9. Each excuse sounded reasonable. But taken together, they formed a pattern that kept me away from Blake's office, away from seeing him and Nicole together. Nicole started calling the house more often, always with work questions that seemed urgent. She would apologize profusely for bothering me, but Blake always needed to talk to her right away. Their conversations would last for hours, and I could hear Blake laughing in his office in a way he never laughed with me anymore. She's just enthusiastic, Blake explained when I mentioned how often Nicole called. She wants to do a good job. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that my husband hiring a pretty young assistant had nothing to do with the growing distance between us. But I wasn't blind. The first time I saw them together outside the office, they were having lunch at a restaurant downtown. I was running errands when I spotted Blake's car in the parking lot. Through the window, I could see him and Nicole sitting across from each other, leaning close, talking intensely. Blake was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. When I confronted him about it that evening, He had a perfectly reasonable explanation. We were discussing the Henderson case. Nicole had some ideas about how to approach the defense, and we needed to talk somewhere quiet. You couldn't discuss it at the office? Blake sighed like I was being unreasonable. The office was too busy. We needed to focus. But I had seen the way they looked at each other. The way Nicole touched Blake's hand when she made a point. The way Blake's eyes never left her face. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Blake started caring about his appearance again. He bought new suits, got his hair cut more often, started working out at the gym. When I complimented him on how good he looked, he would brush off the praise. I'm just trying to be more professional for the clients, he would say. But I noticed he only dressed up on days when Nicole was working. The phone calls got longer and more frequent. Sometimes Blake would take calls from Nicole after we had gone to bed, speaking in low voices that he thought I couldn't hear. When I asked about them, he said Nicole was having problems with a difficult case and needed guidance. She's still learning, Zara. I can't just leave her to figure everything out on her own. Nicole started showing up at our house at odd times. Always with work files, always apologetic about the intrusion, but Blake never seemed surprised to see her. Like they had planned these visits without telling me. I'm so sorry to bother you on a Sunday, Mrs. Morrison, she would say, standing in my doorway with a stack of papers. But Blake asked me to drop these off, and I wanted to get them to him before tomorrow's meeting. She would stay for an hour, sitting at my kitchen table with Blake, discussing cases while I made coffee and tried not to feel like a stranger in my own home. They had their own language now, their own jokes, their own way of communicating that didn't include me. The worst part was how Nicole continued to act like my friend. She would compliment my cooking, ask about my day, even bring me small gifts from her shopping trips. A scarf she thought would look beautiful on me. A book she thought I might enjoy. Flowers from my garden. You're so generous to let Blake work such long hours, she would say. I know it's hard on wives when their husbands are dedicated to their careers. She was playing both sides perfectly. Making Blake feel like she understood him in ways I didn't, while making me feel like she was on my side, sympathetic to my situation. I started finding excuses to drop by Blake's office unannounced. Every time I did, Nicole would jump up from her desk with a bright smile, as if she was delighted to see me. But I noticed how quickly she and Blake would separate if they had been standing close together. How their conversation would shift from personal to professional in seconds. Zara, what a nice surprise, Nicole would say. Blake and I were just going over the Morrison case files. But I could see the flush on her cheeks, the way Blake wouldn't meet my eyes. 6 months before Blake asked for the divorce, I found a credit card bill that showed charges at expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, and hotels. When I confronted Blake about it, he said he was taking clients to dinner and buying gifts for important business relationships. Nicole helps me choose appropriate gifts for clients' wives, he explained. She has better taste than I do. I looked at the jewelry store charges. $300 at Tiffany. $500 at a boutique diamond shop. These weren't gifts for clients' wives. Blake, this is a lot of money. Are you sure this is necessary? He got angry then, angrier than I had seen him in years. I'm building a business, Zara. I'm trying to secure our future. If you can't trust me to make the right decisions, maybe you don't understand what I'm trying to accomplish. That was the beginning of the end. Blake stopped pretending to include me in his life. He stopped coming home for dinner most nights. He stopped sleeping in our bed, claiming his work schedule was keeping him up too late and he didn't want to disturb me. Nicole became bolder. She started answering Blake's phone when I called the office, speaking to me with the casual familiarity of someone who spent more time with my husband than I did. He's in a meeting right now, Mrs. Morrison, but I'll have him call you back. Do you know when he'll be home tonight? Oh, we're working on the Patterson case tonight. It might be very late. Like they were a team and I was an outsider asking for information. The last time I tried to fight for my marriage was 3 months before the divorce. I planned a romantic evening, Blake's favorite dinner, candles, wine, the works. I dressed up in a new dress and waited for him to come home. He walked in at 10:30, saw the cold dinner on the table, and sighed like I had done something wrong. Zara, I told you I was working late tonight. Nicole and I had to finish the Henderson brief. I thought maybe we could spend some time together, I said. We haven't had a real conversation in weeks. Blake loosened his tie and headed for his office. I'm exhausted. Can we talk tomorrow? But tomorrow never came. There was always another case, another crisis, another reason why Blake and Nicole needed to work together and I needed to stay out of the way. Now I watched them dancing at their engagement party, and I could see exactly how it had happened. The long hours alone together. The shared excitement of building something. The way Nicole made Blake feel young and important and desired again. She had played the game perfectly and she had won. But Nicole didn't know about Robert's will. She didn't know that Blake's inheritance came with conditions. She had fallen in love with Blake's money as much as Blake himself. And she was about to learn that the fortune she thought she was marrying into didn't exist anymore. The morning Blake asked for the divorce, I woke up feeling like something was wrong. Not because Blake was acting different, he had been distant for months, but because the house felt different. Like the air was charged with electricity before a storm. Blake was already dressed in his best suit when I came downstairs to make coffee. He was standing by the kitchen window, looking out at the garden I had spent years creating, and his posture was stiff with determination. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "You're up early. I need to talk to you about something important." The words hit me like cold water. I had been expecting this conversation for months, dreading it but also almost relieved that it was finally coming. The pretending had been exhausting. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to eat breakfast together every morning during the first years of our marriage. Where we used to plan our days, share our dreams, laugh about silly things we had seen on television. Blake sat across from me but wouldn't look directly at me. His hands were folded on the table, and I could see he was wearing his wedding ring. I wondered how much longer he would keep it on. "Zara, I want a divorce." 5 words. 15 years of marriage, and it came down to 5 words delivered like he was reading from a script. I had imagined this moment so many times over the past few months that I thought I was prepared for it. But hearing the actual words still felt like being punched in the chest. "Is there someone else?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Blake looked me in the eye then, and I saw him make the decision to lie to me one more time. "No. I just don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time." The cruelty of that answer took my breath away. Not just that he didn't love me, but that he had been living a lie for years. How long had he been counting down the days until he could leave me? How long had I been sleeping next to a man who was mentally packing his bags? How long? I whispered. "What? How long have you not loved me?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think that matters now. It matters to me." He sighed like I was being unreasonable for wanting to understand how my marriage had died. "A few years, I guess. Maybe longer. We just grew apart, Zara. It happens. We grew apart. Like it was something that happened to us instead of something he chose. Like I hadn't been trying to close the distance between us for years while he pulled further and further away." "Is it Nicole?" I asked. Blake's face went pale. For a moment I thought he might tell me the truth. But then he shook his head. "This has nothing to do with Nicole. This is about us, about how we don't work together anymore." The lies were almost worse than the truth. At least if he had been honest, I could have respected him for that. Instead, he sat in my kitchen, in the house I had made into our home, and lied to my face about the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for months. "What do you want from me, Blake?" "I want an amicable divorce. We can split things fairly, you keep the house, I keep the business. We don't have any kids, so it should be straightforward." Straightforward. Like dissolving 15 years of marriage was just a business transaction. Like the life we had built together was nothing more than assets to be divided. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," Blake continued. "He can recommend someone for you or you can find your own representation. Either way, I'd like to get this done as quickly as possible." He had already spoken to a lawyer. He had planned this conversation, prepared for it, made decisions about our future without including me. I wondered how long he had been planning to leave me. Weeks? Months? Had he been discussing divorce strategies with his lawyer while coming home and pretending everything was normal? "Why now?" I asked. "What do you mean? Why are you doing this now? What changed?" Blake stood up from the table and started pacing, a sign that he was uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Nothing changed, Zara. That's the problem. We've been living like roommates for years. We don't talk anymore, we don't connect, we don't even sleep in the same bed most nights. You're the one who moved to the guest room," I pointed out. "You're the one who stopped talking to me." "See, this is what I'm talking about," Blake said, his voice getting sharper. "Everything is always my fault with you. You never take responsibility for your part in our problems." My part? What was my part? Supporting his career? Taking care of his dying father? Keeping our home running while he worked 12-hour days? Trying desperately to reconnect with a husband who had already emotionally left me for another woman? But I didn't say any of that. I was tired of fighting for someone who didn't want to be fought for. "Fine," I said. "I'll sign the papers." Blake stopped pacing and stared at me. Just like that. What did you expect, Blake? That I would beg you to stay? That I would fight for a marriage you don't want? I just thought. He thought I would make it difficult. He thought I would cry and plead and make him feel guilty for leaving me. Maybe he had even hoped I would, so he could feel like the victim instead of the man who had destroyed his marriage for a younger woman. I'll need a few days to find a lawyer and review whatever paperwork you have, I said. But if this is what you want, I won't stand in your way. Blake's relief was visible. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in months, he looked at me with something that wasn't irritation or impatience. Thank you, Zara. I know this is hard, but I think it's the right thing for both of us. The right thing for both of us. Like he was doing me a favor by leaving me for his secretary. 3 days later, Blake's lawyer called me with the divorce papers. The terms were exactly what Blake had outlined. I would keep the house and my car, he would keep the law practice and all the money in our joint accounts. No alimony, no extended negotiations, no fighting over assets. I took the papers to my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia who specialized in divorce cases. She looked over everything and frowned. Mrs. Morrison, you could fight for more. You supported your husband through law school, you helped build his practice, and you've been married for 15 years. You're entitled to part of his business assets. I just want it to be over, I told her. Are you sure? Once you sign these papers, you can't change your mind. And there's something else. Your husband is set to inherit a substantial amount from his father's estate. You could be entitled to part of that as well. The inheritance is Blake's, I said. It has nothing to do with me. Patricia gave me a look that suggested she thought I was making a mistake. If you change your mind, call me before you sign anything. But I didn't change my mind. A week later, I sat in Blake's lawyer's office and signed my name on every page. Blake sat across from me and for a moment he looked uncertain. Are you sure about this, Zara? Are you? He nodded, but I could see something in his eyes that might have been regret. Not regret about leaving me, but regret about how he was doing it. How he had lied to me, betrayed me, broken his promises without giving me a chance to fight for us. I hope you'll be happy, I said as I signed the last page. Blake's hand paused over his own signature. You too, Zara. I really mean that. Maybe he did. Maybe in his own selfish way, Blake convinced himself that he was setting me free to find someone better. Maybe he told himself that leaving me was an act of kindness rather than betrayal. I didn't care anymore. I signed my name, gathered my purse, and walked out of that office a free woman. Blake called me a few times over the next few weeks, asking about mail that came to the house or items he had forgotten. His voice was always carefully casual, like we were old friends who had simply decided to go our separate ways. I hope there are no hard feelings, he said during one of these calls. No hard feelings, I lied. The truth was I felt empty. Not angry, not sad, just hollow. Like I had spent 15 years of my life investing in something that had never been real. Blake had loved me once, I was sure of that. But somewhere along the way that love had died, and he had been too cowardly to tell me until he found someone else to take my place. A month after the divorce was finalized, I saw Blake and Nicole together at a restaurant downtown. They were holding hands across the table, looking at each other like they were the only people in the world. Nicole was wearing a new necklace that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They looked happy. Young and excited and free from the burden of a marriage that had run its course. I went home that night and found Robert's lawyer's business card in my address book. He had called me after Robert's funeral, asking if I needed anything, telling me that Robert had spoken of me often during his final months. He loved you like a daughter, the lawyer had said. If you ever need help with anything, please don't hesitate to call. I had never called. But now I dialed his number. Mr. Harrison? This is Zara Morrison. Well, Zara Thompson now. I was Robert Morrison's daughter-in-law. I was wondering if you could help me with something. That phone call changed everything. That phone call led me to discover the real version of Robert's will. The version that Blake didn't know about. The version that was about to destroy his perfect new life. The day after I signed the divorce papers, I woke up in my empty house and realized I had no idea who I was anymore. For 15 years, I had been Blake Morrison's wife. Before that, I had been a teacher, a daughter, a woman with dreams of her own. But I had lost all of that somewhere in the process of becoming half of a couple that no longer existed. The silence in the house was overwhelming. No sound of Blake's morning routine, no hurried conversations about his schedule, no need to plan my day around someone else's needs. Just me in the echoing rooms of a house that suddenly felt too big. I made coffee for one instead of two. I read the entire newspaper instead of just glancing at the headlines before Blake took the sports section. I ate breakfast standing at the kitchen counter because there was no point in setting the table for just myself. Then I cried. Not the dignified tears I had held back during the divorce proceedings, but ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for the marriage I had lost, for the years I had wasted trying to save something that was already dead, for the woman I had been before I lost herself in trying to be the perfect wife. When the tears finally stopped, I looked around my house with new eyes. This was my space now. Not our space, not a place where I had to consider anyone else's preferences or needs. What? The first thing I did was paint the living room. Blake had always said the walls were fine the way they were, but I had wanted to change them for years. I chose a warm yellow that reminded me of sunshine, and I painted every wall myself over the course of a weekend. When I was finished, the room looked completely different. Brighter. Happier. Next, I cleaned out Blake's office. He had taken most of his important things, but he had left behind years of old files, law books, and business papers. I packed everything into boxes and had them delivered to his new apartment. I wanted no reminders of his work life in my house. With the office empty, I had a decision to make. I could turn it into a guest room or a home gym or just leave it empty. Instead, I decided to make it into something I had been wanting for years, an art studio. I had given up painting when Blake complained about the smell of the oils. I had packed away my easel and brushes and told myself I would get back to art someday when we had more space, more time, more money. There had always been a reason to wait. Now I unpacked my supplies and set up my easel by the window that faced the garden. The afternoon light was perfect. I couldn't believe I had wasted years not using this room for something I loved. The first painting I finished was of the beach where Blake and I used to go for our anniversary. But this version was different from my memories. In my painting, the beach was empty except for a single woman walking along the water's edge, her hair flowing behind her in the wind, her face turned toward the horizon instead of looking back. My best friend Simone came to visit a month after the divorce was final. We had been friends since college, but Blake had never liked her. He thought she was too opinionated, too independent, too likely to give me ideas about what I should expect from a marriage. "I love what you've done with the place," Simone said as she looked around the house. "It actually feels like you now instead of some magazine showroom." "You never liked how I decorated when Blake lived here?" Simone gave me a look. "Honey, you didn't decorate when Blake lived here. You arranged everything to make him comfortable and forgot about what made you happy." She was right. I had chosen neutral colors, conservative furniture, nothing too personal or quirky that might bother Blake. Now I had colorful throw pillows, plants everywhere, and my own artwork on the walls. "So what's next?" Simone asked as we sat in my newly painted living room drinking wine. "Are you going to start dating? Go back to teaching? Travel?" "I don't know," I admitted. For so long, my life was about taking care of Blake's needs that I'm not sure what my own needs are anymore. "Then that's where you start," Simone said. "Figure out what Zara wants, not what anyone else expects from you." What did I want? It was such a simple question, but I realized I hadn't asked myself that in years. I wanted to paint again. I wanted to travel to places Blake had never been interested in visiting. I wanted to read books he would have called frivolous. I wanted to make friends he wouldn't approve of. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be excited about something instead of just going through the motions of living. I started small. I joined a painting class at the community college. The teacher was a woman in her 70s who had been painting for 50 years, and she treated art like it was the most important thing in the world. "Don't paint what you think you should paint," she told us. "Paint what makes you feel alive." I painted storms and sunsets and city streets at night. I painted portraits of women who looked strong and independent and unafraid. I painted my memories, but I changed them, made them better, turned painful experiences into something beautiful. The other students in the class were mostly women like me, divorced, widowed, or just looking for something that belonged to them alone. We became friends in the way that people do when they meet at a turning point in their lives. We supported each other's art and shared stories about starting over. 3 months after the divorce, I decided to do something I had been thinking about since I was 25 years old: start my own business. I had always been good with numbers and organization, and I had spent years managing Blake's office informally. Why not use those skills for myself? I started a bookkeeping service for small businesses. It was something I could do from home, something that would give me flexibility and independence. I wasn't looking to get rich, I just wanted to feel useful again, to know that my work mattered to someone. My first client was the owner of a small restaurant who had been struggling to keep track of her finances. Within a month, I had organized her books and helped her identify ways to cut costs and increase profits. She was so grateful that she recommended me to 3 other business owners. Word spread quickly in our small business community. I was reliable, affordable, and I understood what it was like to worry about money and success. Within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle working part-time. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something I had accomplished. Not something I had done to support someone else's dreams, but something that was entirely mine. I used some of my earnings to fix up the house. I had the kitchen updated, replaced the old carpets with hardwood floors, and landscaped the backyard with a vegetable garden. Every change I made was a choice I made for myself, without having to consider anyone else's preferences. Blake called me occasionally during those first few months. Always with some excuse, mail that had been delivered to the house, a question about our old insurance policies, a problem with paperwork from our joint accounts. But I could tell he was really calling to check on me to make sure I was okay. "You sound good," he said during one of these calls. "Happy." "I am happy," I told him, and I realized it was true. "I'm glad. I was worried about how you would handle being on your own." Being on my own. Like it was something to be survived rather than enjoyed. "I'm doing better than I expected," I said. There was a pause. "Zara, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. The way things ended, I could have handled it better." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest Blake had ever come to admitting he had done something wrong. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me," I said. "But you did hurt me, Blake. You hurt me for a long time before you finally left." "I know. I'm sorry." 2 words I had waited years to hear. They should have meant more to me, but they felt empty now. Too little, too late. "How are you and Nicole doing?" I asked because I was genuinely curious. "We're good. Really good. She makes me feel." He stopped, realizing that telling his ex-wife how his new girlfriend made him feel might not be appropriate. "She makes you feel young again," I finished for him. Yeah, she does." I didn't tell Blake that he made me feel old, worn down, used up during the last years of our marriage. I didn't tell him that since he had left, I felt more energetic and optimistic than I had in years. Some truths were too cruel to share, even with someone who had been cruel to you. "I hope you'll both be very happy," I said. And I meant it. I wanted Blake to be happy with Nicole because if he was happy, he would leave me alone to build my new life. I didn't want him back. I wanted him gone completely so I could figure out who I was without him. After we hung up, I sat in my art studio and looked at the painting I was working on. It was a portrait of a woman standing in a doorway, half in shadow and half in bright sunlight. She was stepping forward, leaving the darkness behind. I was that woman. I was stepping into the light, into a life that was entirely my own creation. I had no idea that across town, Blake was making plans to marry Nicole at the beach where he and I had once promised to love each other forever. And I had no idea that Robertsville was about to give me the power to destroy everything Blake thought he had gained by leaving me. Robert Morrison was the kind of man who noticed everything but rarely spoke about what he saw. During the 2 years I cared for him while he battled cancer, he watched his son's marriage crumble with the sharp eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize patterns of human behavior. "Blake's making a mistake," he told me one afternoon as I helped him with his medication. We were sitting in my living room and Blake was at work. Again. He had been at work every day that week, despite his father's rapidly declining health. "He's just focused on building his practice," I said, automatically defending my husband. "He wants to make sure we're financially secure." Robert gave me a look that was both sad and knowing. "Sweetheart, there's a difference between working hard for your family and running away from your family. Blake is running." I had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from Robert made it real in a way that hurt. "Running from what?" I asked. "From growing up. From responsibility. From the hard work that real love requires." Robert reached over and patted my hand. "You've been patient with him, more patient than he deserves. But patience isn't always a kindness, Zara. Sometimes it's just enabling someone to avoid becoming the person they need to be." These conversations with Robert became more frequent as his illness progressed. Blake was always too busy to spend time with his dying father, so I became Robert's confidant, his companion, his caretaker. We had long talks about life, love, regret, and the choices people make. "I spoiled Blake when he was young," Robert told me one evening after a particularly difficult day of treatment. "After his mother died, I felt guilty about raising him alone. I gave him everything he wanted instead of teaching him to work for what he needed." Blake's mother had died when he was 12. Robert had raised him as a single father while building a successful business empire. I had always admired how close they seemed, but now I was beginning to understand that their relationship was more complicated than I had realized. "Blake learned that he could have whatever he wanted without consequences," Robert continued. When he got in trouble at school, I hired tutors instead of making him face his failures. When he crashed his first car, I bought him a better one instead of making him earn the money to replace it. I taught him that love means never having to face the results of your choices. You were a good father, I protested. You were grieving too. I was a guilty father, Robert corrected. And guilt makes people make poor decisions. I should have taught Blake that real love sometimes means disappointment, boundaries, consequences. Instead, I taught him that someone would always clean up his messes. I thought about the pattern of our marriage, how I had always been the one to compromise, to accommodate, to smooth over problems instead of addressing them. Had I been enabling Blake the same way his father had? The difference is, Robert said, reading my thoughts, you're not his parent. You're his partner. And a partner deserves to be treated as an equal, not a caretaker. 6 months before Robert died, he asked me to drive him to his lawyer's office. I thought it was for routine business, updating insurance policies or handling some corporate paperwork. But when we arrived, Robert's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was waiting with documents that would change everything. Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law wants to discuss his will with you, Mr. Harrison said as we settled into his office. I was confused. Shouldn't Blake be here for this? Blake will inherit everything when I'm gone, Robert explained. The business, the real estate, the investments, everything I've built over 30 years. But I want to make sure he understands what that inheritance means. Robert had built Morrison Industries from nothing. What had started as a small construction company had grown into an empire that included real estate development, property management, and commercial construction. The company was worth millions of dollars, and Blake stood to inherit all of it. The thing is, Robert continued, I've watched Blake treat you like you're disposable. I've seen him take you for granted, ignore your needs, prioritize everything else over his marriage. And I'm worried that if he inherits my money with no strings attached, he'll think he can treat everyone in his life the same way. Mr. Harrison spread the will documents across his desk. Your father-in-law wants to add a clause to his will. A condition on Blake's inheritance. What kind of condition? I asked. Robert looked at me with the seriousness of a man who knew he was dying. Blake inherits everything only if he remains married to you. If he divorces you, the entire inheritance goes to charity unless you specifically agree otherwise. I stared at Robert in shock. I can't let you do that. Blake would never forgive me if he knew. Blake doesn't need to know, Robert said. This clause will only become relevant if he chooses to leave you. If he honors his wedding vows, he'll inherit everything as planned. But if he betrays those vows, he'll face the consequences. What if we're both unhappy? What if divorce is the right choice for both of us? Then you can waive the clause and let him have the money, Robert explained. The power would be in your hands. You would decide whether Blake deserves to inherit my life's work after throwing away the most important relationship in his life. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law is essentially naming you as the guardian of his son's moral character. He's giving you the power to ensure that Blake treats his marriage with the respect it deserves. I was overwhelmed. This felt like too much responsibility, too much power over Blake's future. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course, Robert agreed. But Zara, I want you to understand something. This isn't about punishing Blake or trapping him in an unhappy marriage. This is about teaching him that his choices have consequences. If he wants to be wealthy, he needs to learn to be a good husband. If he wants to inherit what I've built, he needs to honor what you've built together. We drove home in silence. I spent the rest of the week thinking about Robert's proposal, weighing the ethics of what he was asking me to do. Finally, I realized that Robert was right about Blake needing to face consequences. I had been protecting him from the results of his selfish choices for years. Maybe it was time to stop. A week later, I returned to Mr. Harrison's office and agreed to the clause. The will was rewritten to include the condition that Blake's inheritance depended on remaining married to me. If he divorced me, everything would go to charity unless I specifically released the money to him. This document will remain sealed until after I'm gone, Robert explained. Blake will be given a standard version of the will that shows him inheriting everything with no conditions. The real will won't be revealed unless and until he files for divorce. What if he finds out about the clause before then? I asked. Then he'll have to decide what's more important to him, his wife or his potential wealth, Robert said. Either way, he'll be making a real choice for the first time in his life. Robert died 8 months later. At the funeral, Blake cried for the father he had rarely made time to visit. He spoke about Robert's legacy, his generosity, his love for family. He promised to honor his father's memory by continuing to build the business Robert had started. After the funeral, Mr. Harrison met with Blake privately to discuss the will. Blake came home that evening excited about his inheritance, already making plans for how he would expand the business and invest the money. "Dad left me everything," he told me, his eyes bright with possibilities. "The company, the real estate portfolio, the investment accounts. It's worth more than I thought, close to $8 million. I listened to Blake talk about his windfall and said nothing about the clause that could take it all away. Part of me felt guilty for keeping such a massive secret. But part of me remembered Robert's words about consequences and choices. "Your father would be proud that you're thinking about expanding the business," I said. "I think he would be," Blake agreed. He always said I had good instincts for this kind of thing. Over the following months, as Blake grew more distant and I suspected he was having an affair, I sometimes wondered if I should tell him about the real will. Maybe if he knew what he stood to lose, he would fight harder to save our marriage. But Robert's plan was working exactly as he had intended. Blake felt secure in his future wealth, confident that he could afford to leave me and start over with someone new. He was making his choice freely without pressure or coercion. When Blake finally asked for the divorce, I thought about Robert's will constantly. I could have thrown it in Blake's face, used it as leverage to keep him in the marriage. But that would have defeated the purpose of Robert's plan. Robert had wanted Blake to choose between his wife and his wealth. He had wanted his son to prove that he valued love over money, commitment over convenience. Blake had made his choice. He had chosen Nicole and his future inheritance over me and our marriage. Now it was my turn to make a choice. I could release the inheritance to Blake, or I could let Robert's justice take its course. As I sat at Nicole and Blake's engagement party, watching them celebrate their love in front of everyone who mattered to them, I touched the envelope in my purse and smiled. Robert had given me the power to teach his son about consequences. It was time for Blake to learn what his choices had really cost him. The invitation arrived on expensive paper with gold lettering, the kind of elegant stationery that Nicole probably spent hours selecting. "Blake Morrison and Nicole Peterson request the pleasure of your company at their engagement celebration." It read, followed by the date, time and location that made my blood freeze. Sunset Beach. Our beach. The place where Blake had proposed to me 17 years ago, where we had celebrated every anniversary, where we had shared our most intimate moments as a couple. I stared at the invitation for a long time, reading it over and over as if the words might change. At the bottom, in smaller print, it said, "Beach ceremony followed by dinner and dancing under the stars." They were having their engagement party at our special place. Not just any beach, but the exact spot where Blake had once promised to love me forever. The audacity of it took my breath away. I called Simone immediately. "Did you get an invitation to Blake's engagement party?" I asked without preamble. "Just opened it," she said grimly. "Zara, I can't believe he chose that beach. What is wrong with him?" "Maybe Nicole doesn't know it's where we used to go," I said, though I didn't believe it. Nicole knew everything about my marriage to Blake. She had made it her business to know. "Oh, she knows," Simone said. "This is deliberate. She wants to claim that beach is theirs now, erase your history with Blake and replace it with her own." The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It wasn't enough that Nicole had stolen my husband. Now she wanted to steal our memories too, to turn the place that had once symbolized my happiness into a celebration of her victory over me. For days I debated whether to attend the party. Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation completely, to spend that evening painting in my studio or reading in my garden. Why should I watch Blake and Nicole celebrate their love in the place where mine had begun? But another part of me, the part that had been quietly planning since my conversation with Mr. Harrison, knew this was the perfect opportunity. Blake's engagement party would be the ideal stage for revealing Robert's will. Blake would be surrounded by friends, family, and business associates. He would be at his most confident, his most secure in his decision to leave me for Nicole. The humiliation of learning about the inheritance clause in front of everyone who mattered to him would be complete and devastating. I made my decision and called to RSVP. "Zara?" Nicole's voice was bright with false enthusiasm when she answered Blake's office phone. "I'm so glad you called. I wasn't sure if you would want to come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said smoothly. "It sounds like a lovely celebration." "It will be," Nicole gushed. "We're having the whole thing catered with a string quartet and everything. Blake wanted it to be perfect." "Perfect?" "At the beach where Blake had once said our wedding was perfect." "I'm looking forward to it," I lied. "Oh, and Zara?" Nicole's voice took on a slightly sharper edge. "I just want you to know that there are no hard feelings on our side. Blake and I really hope you can be happy for us." No hard feelings on their side. Like they were the injured parties in this situation. Of course, I said. I want Blake to be happy. That much was true. I did want Blake to be happy. I just wanted him to earn that happiness by facing the consequences of his choices first. After I hung up, I called Mr. Harrison to confirm the details of our plan. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked. "We could handle this privately in my office." "No," I said firmly. "Blake made his choices publicly. He can face the consequences the same way." "Very well. I'll attend the party as planned and bring the necessary documents. Are you prepared for how Blake might react?" I had been thinking about Blake's reaction for weeks. He would be shocked first, then angry, then desperate. He would probably try to convince me to release the inheritance to him, might even promise to leave Nicole and come back to me. "I'm prepared," I told Mr. Harrison. The week before the engagement party, I focused on getting ready for what I privately called Justice Day. I had my hair done at an expensive salon, bought a new dress that made me feel confident and beautiful, and spent extra time at the gym to make sure I looked my best. If I was going to destroy Blake's world in front of his friends, I was going to look stunning while I did it. I also prepared emotionally for what was about to happen. I practiced staying calm, keeping my voice steady, maintaining my dignity no matter how Blake reacted. I rehearsed the words I would say when I revealed the will, made sure I could deliver them without shaking. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. This was about justice. This was about consequences. This was about teaching Blake that his actions affected other people in ways he had never bothered to consider. The night before the party, I sat in my art studio looking at the painting I had done of the empty beach. Tomorrow that beach wouldn't be empty. It would be filled with people celebrating Blake and Nicole's engagement, witnesses to the moment when Blake learned that his father's love had come with conditions he had failed to meet. I opened the envelope from Mr. Harrison and read through the documents one more time. The language was clear and unambiguous. Blake's inheritance was contingent on remaining married to me. By divorcing me to marry Nicole, he had forfeited his right to his father's estate. Unless I chose to release the inheritance to him, the power was entirely in my hands. I thought about the woman I had been when Blake asked for the divorce. Broken, defeated, willing to sign away my rights just to end the pain of fighting for someone who didn't want to be fought for. That woman would have released the inheritance immediately, would have told Blake to take the money and be happy with Nicole. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was stronger now, more confident, more aware of my own worth. I had rebuilt my life from nothing and created something beautiful. I had learned that I didn't need Blake's love to be complete. And I had learned that sometimes justice required action. The morning of the engagement party, I woke up feeling calmer than I had in months. I had breakfast on my deck, read the newspaper, watered my garden. I treated it like any other day, refusing to let anxiety or doubt cloud my resolve. At 5 o'clock, I put on my new dress, a deep blue that complemented my skin tone and made me feel powerful. I did my makeup carefully, styled my hair, and chose jewelry that Robert had given me for Christmas years ago. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who was ready to face whatever came next. I drove to the beach as the sun was beginning to set, the golden light turning the water into liquid fire. Cars filled the parking area, and I could hear music and laughter carried on the ocean breeze. As I walked toward the party, I saw the elaborate setup Nicole had arranged. White tents, elegant table settings, flowers everywhere, and a small stage where Blake and Nicole would make their announcement. It was beautiful and expensive and completely different from the simple, intimate celebrations Blake and I had shared at this beach. I found a spot at the edge of the crowd where I could see everything but remain relatively inconspicuous. Blake was in the center of the party, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. He looked handsome and happy and completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Nicole was radiant in a white cocktail dress, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured while talking to friends. She had won and she knew it. She had taken Blake away from me and was now claiming our sacred place as her own. Mr. Harrison arrived at 6:30, carrying his briefcase and wearing the serious expression of a man about to deliver life-changing news. He found me in the crowd and nodded slightly, confirming that he was ready to proceed. At 7 o'clock, Blake took the microphone to make his announcement. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate with Nicole and me," he began, his voice carrying across the beach. "This place is very special to me, and I can't think of anywhere I'd rather announce my engagement to the woman I love." The crowd applauded, and Nicole joined Blake on the small stage, her face glowing with happiness. "Nicole has brought joy back into my life," Blake continued. "She's made me remember what it feels like to be excited about the future, to look forward to each new day. I can't wait to start our married life together." More applause. I could see several people in the crowd who had been at my wedding to Blake, who had celebrated our anniversaries with us, who knew the history of this beach. Some of them looked uncomfortable with Blake's choice of venue, but they smiled and clapped politely. I also want to thank my father, Robert Morrison, who taught me the value of hard work and family, Blake said, his voice becoming more emotional. Dad always said that a man's legacy isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the relationships he builds and the love he shares. I know he would be happy to see me so blessed with love and prosperity. The mention of Robert and his values made my chest tight with anger. Robert had tried to teach Blake about the importance of relationships and commitment. Blake had ignored those lessons and was now using his father's memory to justify abandoning his marriage vows. So please join me in toasting my beautiful fiancée, Nicole Peterson, and the beginning of our life together. Blake raised his champagne glass and the crowd followed suit. I watched as they toasted the couple's future, celebrating the love that had been built on the destruction of my marriage. It was time. I caught Mr. Harrison's eye and nodded. He made his way through the crowd toward the stage, his briefcase in hand, his expression serious. Blake saw him approaching and smiled, probably assuming his father's lawyer had come to congratulate him on his engagement. He had no idea that Mr. Harrison was about to destroy everything he thought he had gained by leaving me. The moment Mr. Harrison stepped onto the small stage, I knew there was no going back. The lawyer's presence immediately commanded attention. Something about his formal bearing and serious expression made the cheerful party atmosphere shift slightly. Blake's smile faltered as he recognized his father's attorney. Mr. Harrison? I wasn't expecting you tonight. Good evening, Blake, Mr. Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly across the beach. I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I need to discuss an urgent legal matter with you. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something important was happening. Nicole moved closer to Blake, her face showing the first hint of concern I had seen all evening. Can't this wait until Monday? Blake asked. We're in the middle of our engagement party. I'm afraid it cannot wait, Mr. Harrison replied. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. This concerns your father's estate and your recent divorce from Mrs. Thompson. Blake's face went pale. I could see him struggling to understand why his divorce had anything to do with his inheritance. Around us, guests were whispering, trying to figure out what was happening. I stepped forward from my position at the edge of the crowd. I had been waiting for this moment for months, and I wanted to be close enough to see Blake's face when he learned the truth. Blake, I said, my voice calm and clear. I think you need to hear what Mr. Harrison has to say. Blake spotted me in the crowd and his confusion deepened. Zara? What are you doing here? You invited me, I said simply. And I have something that belongs to you. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying all evening. The envelope that contained photocopies of Robert's real will, the version Blake had never seen. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but this matter requires immediate attention. He turned back to Blake. Blake, when your father's will was probated, you were given a standard copy that outlined your inheritance. However, there was a sealed clause in the original will that has now become relevant due to your change in marital status. What kind of clause? Blake asked, but I could tell from his voice that he was beginning to understand this wasn't good news. Your father included a condition on your inheritance, Mr. Harrison explained. Specifically, you inherit his entire estate only if you remain married to Zara Thompson, formerly Zara Morrison. By divorcing her, you have forfeited your right to the inheritance. The silence that followed was complete. I could hear the waves lapping against the shore, the distant cry of seagulls, but no human sound. Everyone was trying to process what they had just heard. Blake stared at Mr. Harrison like he had spoken in a foreign language. That's impossible. Dad wouldn't, he couldn't. The clause is quite clear, Mr. Harrison said, opening the folder and extracting documents. Unless Mrs. Thompson specifically agrees to release the inheritance to you, your father's entire estate, valued at approximately $8 million, will be donated to charity as specified in his will. Blake's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on a nearby chair, his face white with shock. Nicole rushed to his side, her own face showing panic as she began to understand what this meant for their future together. $8 million? Someone in the crowd whispered. This has to be a mistake, Blake said weakly. Dad never told me about any conditions. Your father was very specific about his reasoning, Mr. Harrison continued. He felt that a man who couldn't honor his marriage vows shouldn't be trusted with the family's wealth and legacy. I stepped onto the stage, still holding my envelope. The crowd parted to let me through, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I approached Blake. "Your father loved you, Blake," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent beach. "But he also saw how you treated our marriage, how you took me for granted, how you chose to break your vows for someone else." Blake looked up at me, his eyes desperate. "Zara, you can't seriously be considering keeping the money? We were unhappy together. The divorce was the right thing for both of us." "The divorce was the right thing for you," I corrected. "You made that choice without considering anyone else's feelings or needs. You chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a younger woman, and you did it in the cruelest way possible." Nicole stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Blake's father can't control his life from the grave. That money belongs to Blake." "Actually," Mr. Harrison interjected, "the money belongs to whomever Robert Morrison chose to leave it to. And he chose to leave it to Blake only under certain conditions that Blake has failed to meet." I looked around at the crowd of people who had come to celebrate Blake and Nicole's engagement. Some of them looked shocked, others seemed to be enjoying the drama, and a few looked like they thought Blake was getting what he deserved. "Blake," I said, turning back to my ex-husband, "your father gave you a choice. You could honor your marriage and inherit his wealth, or you could abandon your wife and lose everything he built. You made your choice." "But I didn't know about the conditions," Blake protested. "If I had known." "If you had known, would you have stayed married to me just for the money?" I asked. "Is that the kind of marriage you think your father wanted you to have?" Blake's silence was answer enough. Nicole's voice rose shrilly. "So what, you're just going to steal Blake's inheritance out of spite? Because you're bitter about the divorce?" I turned to look at Nicole, really look at her for the first time all evening. She was young and beautiful, and she had probably convinced herself that she and Blake were star-crossed lovers whose happiness had been threatened by his bitter ex-wife. "Nicole," I said calmly, "I'm not stealing anything. I'm simply allowing Blake to face the consequences of his choices. He chose to leave me for you. He chose to break his marriage vows. He chose to have his engagement party at the beach where he once promised to love me forever. These were all his decisions." "You're being vindictive," Nicole spat. "No," I said. "I'm being just." Blake stood up suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Zara, please. We can work something out. I made mistakes, I know that now. But taking the inheritance won't change what happened between us." I looked down at Blake's hand on my arm, then back at his face. "Let go of me, Blake." He released me immediately, perhaps remembering that we were surrounded by witnesses. "You're right," I said. "Taking the inheritance won't change what happened between us. But it will teach you something your father tried to teach you your entire life, that actions have consequences." I opened my envelope and pulled out the photocopies of Robert's will. "I've had these documents for months, Blake. I knew about the inheritance clause before I signed our divorce papers. I could have used it as leverage to keep you in our marriage, but I didn't want a husband who only stayed with me for money." Blake's face showed a flicker of hope. "So you'll release the inheritance to me?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I had felt in months. "No, Blake. I won't." The crowd erupted in murmurs and whispers. Nicole let out a small cry of distress. Blake stared at me like I had just pronounced his death sentence. "The money will go to charity just as your father intended," I continued. "But I want you to know that this isn't about revenge. This is about justice. This is about teaching you that you can't treat people like they're disposable and expect no consequences." Blake's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, desperation, and finally something that might have been understanding. $8 million, Zara, he said quietly. "You're throwing away $8 million just to prove a point?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "I'm honoring your father's wishes. Robert wanted his money to go to someone who understood the value of commitment, loyalty, and love. You proved that you don't understand those values." I turned to address the crowd that had gathered around us. "I want everyone here to understand something. Blake Morrison is free to marry whomever he chooses, to be happy with whomever he chooses. But freedom comes with responsibility. When you break your promises to the people who love you, when you betray the trust of those who support you, there are consequences." I looked back at Blake one last time. "Your father loved you enough to try to teach you this lesson even after he was gone. I'm honoring that love by allowing the lesson to be learned." With that, I turned and walked away from the stage, leaving Blake and Nicole to face the crowd of people who had come to celebrate their engagement and instead witnessed the destruction of their financial future. As I walked across the beach toward my car, I could hear the party dissolving behind me. People were leaving, talking in hushed voices about what they had just witnessed. The celebration was over. I had given Blake exactly what he deserved. A lesson in consequences that his father would have been proud of. And for the first time since my divorce, I felt truly free. The story of Blake Morrison's lost inheritance spread through our small town like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone who mattered in the business community had heard about what happened at the engagement party. The local newspaper even ran a small piece about the dramatic revelation at a beach celebration, though they were careful not to name names. I spent the day after the party in my art studio, painting. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The weight of carrying Robert's secret was gone, and the justice I had waited so long to deliver had finally been served. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. Friends calling to check on me, acquaintances wanting to know if the rumors were true, reporters hoping for an interview. I ignored them all except for Simone, who came over in the afternoon with wine and a look of pure admiration on her face. "Zara Thompson," she said as she hugged me, "you are my hero. The way you handled that last night was absolutely perfect." "I just did what needed to be done," I said, but I couldn't help smiling. Robert would have been proud. $8 million? Simone shook her head in amazement. "You just walked away from $8 million to teach that man a lesson." "I didn't walk away from anything," I corrected her. "That money was never mine. It belonged to Robert, and he was very clear about what should happen to it if Blake broke his marriage vows." We sat on my deck with our wine, enjoying the warm afternoon sun. I felt lighter than I had in years, like a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. "So what happens now?" Simone asked. "Now Blake learns to live with the consequences of his choices," I said. "And I get to watch from a distance while continuing to build my own life." But Blake wasn't ready to accept his fate quietly. He showed up at my house the next evening, looking haggard and desperate. He had clearly been drinking, and his expensive suit was wrinkled like he had slept in it. "Zara, please," he said when I opened the door. "We need to talk." I stayed in the doorway, not inviting him in. "There's nothing to talk about, Blake. You made your choices." "I made mistakes," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "I know that. But $8 million, Zara. $8 million could change both our lives." "My life doesn't need changing," I said calmly. "I'm happy with what I've built for myself." Blake leaned against my door frame, looking more pathetic than I had ever seen him. "Nicole left me." I wasn't surprised, but I was curious. "When?" "This morning. She packed her things and moved out while I was at work. Didn't even leave a note, just took her ring off and left it on the kitchen counter." So Nicole had shown her true colors once she realized there would be no money. Part of me felt sorry for Blake. It had to hurt to realize that the woman he had left his wife for was only interested in his wealth. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want Blake to be miserable. I just wanted him to understand that his actions had consequences. "She was only with me for Dad's money," Blake continued, seeming to need to say the words out loud. "She never loved me. She loved what she thought I could give her." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she loved the idea of being married to a wealthy man. Either way, you chose her over me, Blake. That was your decision." Blake looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I chose wrong. I see that now. Zara, I want to come home. I want to try again with us." I had been expecting this. Blake was predictable. When his comfortable world fell apart, he would try to go back to what felt safe and familiar. "No, Blake," I said firmly. "We're not doing this. You can't come back here whenever your other plans don't work out." "But we were good together," he protested. "We had 15 good years." "We had some good years," I corrected. "And then we had several bad years while you pulled away from me and fell in love with someone else. You don't get to rewrite that history just because Nicole didn't work out." Blake's desperation was palpable. "I'll do anything, Zara. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit working late, I'll be the husband you always wanted me to be. Just please release Dad's inheritance to me." There it was, the real reason for his visit. Blake wasn't here because he missed me or because he realized he had made a mistake leaving me. He was here because he wanted his father's money, and I was the only person who could give it to him. "Blake," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "if you had come here and said you realized you loved me and wanted to rebuild our marriage without mentioning the money once, I might have been willing to listen. But the fact that your proposal to reconcile is tied to releasing the inheritance tells me everything I need to know about your motivations." Blake's face crumpled. "The money would let us start over. We could travel, buy a bigger house, maybe have the kids we always talked about. We're both past 40, Blake. And you spent the last 5 years of our marriage telling me you weren't ready for children because you were too focused on building your career. Things could be different now. Yes, they could be. But not with you. Not after everything that's happened. I stepped back and started to close the door. Go home, Blake. Figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on your father's money or anyone else's willingness to support you. Zara, wait. I closed the door and locked it, then watched through the window as Blake stood on my porch for several minutes before finally walking back to his car. He sat in my driveway for almost an hour, and I wondered if he was waiting for me to change my mind or just working up the courage to drive away and face his new reality. Over the next few weeks, I heard updates about Blake's situation through mutual friends and the local gossip network. He had been forced to let go of most of his staff at the law office because he couldn't afford their salaries without his father's money. He had to sell his expensive car and move into a smaller apartment. Several of his business associates had distanced themselves from him once word spread about why he lost his inheritance. The most telling detail came from his former secretary, not Nicole, but the older woman who had worked for him before Nicole arrived. She told people that Blake had borrowed heavily against his expected inheritance to pay for Nicole's engagement ring, a new car, and their elaborate engagement party. Without the inheritance, he was deeply in debt and struggling to keep his law practice afloat. I felt no satisfaction in hearing about Blake's financial troubles. I had never wanted to see him suffer. I had simply wanted him to face the consequences of his choices. Robert's will had accomplished exactly what it was designed to do. It had taught Blake that his actions affected other people and that he couldn't treat relationships as disposable without paying a price. A month after the engagement party, Mr. Harrison called to update me on the legal proceedings. The inheritance transfer to charity will be finalized next week, he told me. Blake has made no further attempts to contest the will or negotiate with you directly? He came by once asking me to reconsider, I said. But when it became clear he was only interested in getting me back to access the money, I refused to discuss it further. Your father-in-law would be proud of how you've handled this situation, Mr. Harrison said. Robert always believed that character was more important than wealth. You've honored that belief. After the legal issues were settled, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not forgiving Blake. I had already done that for my own peace of mind. But forgiving myself for the years I had spent trying to save a marriage that one person had already abandoned. I realized that Blake's betrayal had actually freed me to become the person I was meant to be. If he hadn't left me, I might never have discovered my strength, my independence, my ability to create a life that made me genuinely happy. 6 weeks after the engagement party, I was working in my garden when I saw Blake's car drive slowly past my house. He didn't stop, but I could see him looking at the improvements I had made, the new landscaping, the fresh paint on the shutters, the art studio addition I was having built. I had used some of the money from my growing bookkeeping business to make the house truly mine. Every change reflected my taste, my preferences, my vision of what a home should be. Blake drove by twice more over the next few weeks, always slowly, always seeming to study what I was doing with my life. I wondered if he was beginning to understand what he had given up when he chose Nicole over me. But it was too late for understanding. Blake had made his choice and now he had to live with it. As for me, I was living with the consequences of my choice to honor Robert's will and refuse to enable Blake's irresponsible behavior any longer. And I was happier than I had been in years. 6 months after Blake's engagement party disaster, I stood in my art studio, putting the finishing touches on a painting that would be featured in my first solo exhibition. The painting showed a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her arms spread wide, her face turned toward a brilliant sunrise. She looked fearless, free, ready to embrace whatever came next. The woman in the painting looked like me, but she was the version of me that had emerged from the ashes of my marriage. Stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth. "That's beautiful, Zara," said a voice from the doorway. I turned to see James Walker, the owner of the downtown gallery that would be hosting my exhibition. He was in his 50s, recently widowed, with kind eyes and a genuine appreciation for art that went beyond its commercial value. James and I had been dating for 2 months. We had met at a coffee shop where I was sketching while waiting for a client meeting. He had approached me hesitantly, complimenting my work and asking if I was a professional artist. "Not yet," I had said, "but I'm working on it." "Would you like to be?" he had asked. "I own a gallery and I'm always looking for talented local artists." That conversation had led to coffee, which had led to dinner, which had led to long walks on the beach where Blake and I used to go for our anniversaries. But when I walked there with James, the memories didn't hurt anymore. The beach had become a place of new possibilities instead of painful reminders. The exhibition opens in 2 weeks, James said, studying my latest painting. Are you nervous? Terrified, I admitted, but also excited. I never thought I'd have the courage to show my work publicly. You found your courage in a lot of ways, James said, slipping his arms around my waist from behind. I'm proud of you. James knew about Blake, about the divorce, about the inheritance situation. I had told him everything early in our relationship because I didn't want any secrets between us. His reaction had surprised me. You gave up $8 million on principle? He had asked, his eyebrows raised in amazement. I honored a promise to someone I loved, I had said. James had kissed me then, softly, reverently. Remind me never to get on your bad side, he had joked. But I could see the respect in his eyes, the understanding that I was a woman who kept her word and expected others to do the same. My business had grown beyond anything I had imagined. Word had spread about my bookkeeping skills, and I now had a waiting list of small business owners who wanted my help organizing their finances. I had hired 2 part-time employees and was considering renting office space outside my home. The success felt different from anything I had experienced during my marriage. This was mine, built with my own skills and effort, not dependent on anyone else's approval or support. Simone stopped by that afternoon to help me prepare for the gallery exhibition. She had been my biggest cheerleader throughout the past year, celebrating every milestone in my personal and professional growth. I have news, she announced as she walked into my kitchen. Guess who I saw at the grocery store yesterday looking like he'd lost his best friend? Blake. I guessed. Blake. And honey, he looked rough. Cheap clothes, driving an old car, looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. I felt a pang of sympathy for my ex-husband, but it was distant, like feeling sorry for a stranger whose troubles had nothing to do with me. How did he seem? I asked. Sad. Defeated. He asked about you, actually. Wanted to know how you were doing, if you were seeing anyone. What did you tell him? I told him you were thriving. That you had your own successful business, that you were happy, that you looked better than you had in years. Simone grinned. I may have also mentioned that you were dating someone wonderful. I shook my head, smiling. Simone, you didn't have to do that. Oh yes, I did. Blake Morrison needs to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of his life. Not because of the money, because of you. That evening, James took me to dinner at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. We sat on the deck, watching boats come and go as the sun set over the water. It was peaceful, romantic, and completely different from the tense, silent meals Blake and I had shared during the final years of our marriage. I have something to tell you, James said as we finished our dessert. My stomach tightened slightly. In my experience, those words usually preceded bad news. What is it? I asked. James reached across the table and took my hand. I'm falling in love with you, Zara. I know it's only been 2 months and I don't want to rush anything, but I wanted you to know how I feel. Relief flooded through me, followed by something warm and bright that I recognized as happiness. Real happiness, not the anxious contentment I had mistaken for happiness during my marriage. I'm falling in love with you too, I said, meaning every word. James squeezed my hand. I want you to know that I see you. Not as someone to take care of me or support my dreams or make my life easier. I see you as a complete person with your own goals and talents and needs. I want to be your partner, not your project. Tears sprang to my eyes. James understood something that Blake never had. That love was about supporting each other's growth, not absorbing each other's identity. Thank you for seeing me, I whispered. As we drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 15 months ago, I had been a broken woman signing divorce papers and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing. Now I was a successful businesswoman, an artist preparing for her first exhibition, and a woman capable of loving and being loved in a healthy way. Robertsville had been the catalyst for my transformation, but the real work had been mine. I had chosen to see Blake's abandonment as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. I had chosen to build something new instead of mourning what I had lost. The next week brought news that Blake's law practice had finally collapsed completely. He had been forced to declare bankruptcy and was now working as an associate at a larger firm, making a fraction of what he had earned when he ran his own practice. I heard the news through mutual friends and felt nothing but mild sadness that things had turned out so badly for him. Blake had lost everything he thought mattered. His business, his money, his young girlfriend, his comfortable lifestyle, because he had been unable to value what truly mattered. The night before my art exhibition opened, I stood in my studio looking at the collection of paintings I would be showing. They told the story of my transformation, from the dark, confused pieces I had painted immediately after the divorce to the bright, confident work I was creating now. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a large painting I had titled Justice. It showed a beach at sunset, but instead of being empty, it was filled with light that seemed to come from within the sand itself. In the foreground, a woman walked away from the viewer toward the horizon, her posture strong and purposeful. It was my version of that night at Blake's engagement party, not the humiliation and revenge that others might have seen, but the moment when I finally stood up for myself and chose justice over convenience. The exhibition opening was a success beyond my wildest dreams. The gallery was packed with people, and several pieces sold within the first hour. James stood beside me as I talked to potential buyers, his pride in my accomplishment evident in every smile and supportive touch. Near the end of the evening, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the back of the gallery, studying my paintings. Blake looked older, tired, wearing a suit that had seen better days. But his attention was completely focused on my art, and his expression was one of genuine amazement. He approached me as the crowd was thinning out. "Congratulations, Zara," he said quietly. "Your work is incredible. I had no idea you were this talented." "Thank you," I said simply. Blake looked around the gallery, taking in the sold tags on many of my paintings, the obvious success of the evening. "You've built something amazing here," he said. "I'm proud of you." "It wasn't built for you to be proud of," I said gently but firmly. "It was built for me." Blake nodded, understanding the distinction. "I know. And I'm glad you found your way to this. You deserve to be happy. So do you, Blake. But happiness has to be earned through right choices, not inherited or taken from other people." Blake was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, perhaps wiser than I had ever heard it. "Dad's will taught me something I should have learned years ago," he said. "Love isn't something you can take for granted. Neither is trust or commitment, or the people who stand by you when life gets difficult." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. I hope you can forgive me someday, Zara. Not for leaving. I understand now that leaving was probably right for both of us. But for the way I left. For the lying, the disrespect, the cruelty of how I handled it all." I looked at Blake, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. Self-awareness. The beginning of wisdom that comes from facing real consequences. "I forgive you, Blake," I said. "I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going backward." "I know," Blake said. "I hope you'll be very happy with James. He seems like a good man." "He is," I said. "He sees me as I am and loves me for it, not despite it." Blake smiled sadly. "That's what love should be." After Blake left, James found me standing in front of my Justice painting. "Are you okay?" he asked, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. That night, as I lay in bed thinking about the evening's success, I realized that Robert's plan had worked exactly as he had intended. Blake had learned about consequences, about the value of commitment, about what it meant to lose something precious through his own poor choices. But the real victory wasn't Blake's humiliation or his loss of the inheritance. The real victory was my transformation from a woman who defined herself through her relationship with a man who didn't value her, to a woman who created her own worth and attracted love that celebrated her strength instead of trying to diminish it. Robert had given me more than the power to teach his son a lesson. He had given me the motivation to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the beach where it all began, where Blake had proposed, where we had celebrated our anniversaries, where he had announced his engagement to another woman, and where I had finally claimed my own power. Tomorrow I thought I might go back to that beach. Not to remember the past, but to celebrate the future I had built from the ashes of what came before. The sun would be shining, the waves would be endless, and I would be free.